from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in Adelaide, back in the city after a bit of a visit to the Limestone Coast, which is the southeastern region of South Australia. So some amazing beaches and then a short drive inland to the Coonawarra, which is a fantastic wine region, a strip of red soil, terra rossa soil, atop limestone, which means wonderful vines and even more wonderful wines are produced there. But a lot happened in the cricket world while I was away. I kept finding oddments of signal to see that England's women had managed to not win a single game in the Ashes. Australia's women absolutely won that series outright. And then all manner of news which we'll be discussing in the show, also surrounding England and Australia's men's teams.
Hi, it's Jim Maxwell in Sydney, and I'm looking out the window and I can see a rainbow, but the end of the rainbow, I'm sorry, Ali, I see Meg Lanning, Elise Perry, Alyssa Healy. It's all gold, 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 gold everywhere. It's been the golden summer for Australian cricket, and what's going to happen next? Pakistan coming up. Sheffield Shield starting. And a bit of T20 against Sri Lanka. So life goes on very happily and hopefully much happy for the England team that's now been selected for the West Indies. They need a bit of a change of fortune. They've certainly got a change of personnel.
Well, one part of the world is certainly going to believe that blue comes before gold, Jim. This is Charu Sharma for All India Radio. Returning from the coffee estate in Coorg, where, of course, there's a lot of picking going on. It's picking season, but I couldn't reach Bangalore in time. So I've stopped halfway, which is in the royal city of Mysore, got myself a hotel room, pulled the curtains together, and here we go. Seems like all is forgiven and forgotten for Indian cricket. Were they really in South Africa a short while back? Well, anyway, the under-19 team has won the World Cup for the 5th time in a row, so it's obviously robust, the system in India. And at home, as always, the Indian team can't seem to do any wrong, particularly against the hapless West Indies.
Yeah, big congratulations to the Indian under-19s. That does bode well for the future, doesn't it, with that strength in depth and youngsters coming through. We are going to start this week, though, on the show by talking about the aftermath of the shock resignation of Australian men's head coach Justin Langer. Now, just to remind everybody, you'll remember that Langer was brought in at a time of real crisis for the Australian men's team. It was after the Sandpapergate scandal in 2018. Well, now he's left his role after a season in which Australia have won both the T20 World Cup and the Ashes. Now, his contract wasn't yet up, but discussions were due on its renewal or otherwise, and his future had been the subject of a lot of speculation. It was believed Langer wanted to continue, so why did he leave? Well, in his resignation letter to Cricket Australia's chief executive, Nick Hockley, he said, quotes, "I was offered a short-term contract until the end of the T20 World Cup in Australia, with the sentiments of going out on a high. After careful consideration," he says, "I've decided not to accept this contract renewal." He goes on to say, "If media reports are correct, several senior players and a couple of support staff don't support me moving forward. And it is now apparent the CA board and UNIC are also keen to see the team move in another direction." He says, "My life has been built on values of honesty, respect, trust, truth and performance. And if that comes across as too intense at times, I apologise." So that was part of Langer's resignation letter, which was published in Australian media. So it's quite a bit to unpack there, isn't there? Langer only offered a 6-month contract extension. The reports of the discord between players and coach, and an apology from Langer for his apparent intensity. New captain Pat Cummins then eventually spoke and clarified his own position, including feedback that he and other senior players gave to the board, insisting that they felt they needed a new style of coaching and skill set to move forward now as a team. I thought he managed to speak with a fair amount of clarity, Pat Cummins. He also addressed those former players who had spoken out, saying, "Just as you've always stuck up for your mates, I'm sticking up for mine," which is very interesting to hear. Jim, how, first of all, did the simple matter of a coach's contract become such a convoluted and emotive affair as well? And what did you make of CA offering just a 6-month deal to Justin Langer?
Well, it was a bit of a flaky cake in the wind, really. I mean, if they'd been brutal, as many organisations are, when they've made their mind up to go in another direction, they should have just said, "Thanks, Justin. Terrific. We're moving on," which is in effect what is going on here. and I don't think there's any doubt that for some months now, if not a year or two, a lot of those involved at the top end in the Australian team, if not the administration, have had the view that Langer's time was up as soon as his contract was up, regardless of what he'd achieved. And he did achieve quite a lot. But Pat Cummins is obviously the man in charge, a very, as you suggested, a clear thinker. He has a lot of intelligence and emotional intelligence. In fact, he's got more emotional intelligence than some of the former players who've been going on with a lot of claptrap about what should be going on with the treatment of Langer. We all know in life, in politics, in business, and in sport, sometimes associations come to an end and it can be quite brutal. How do you handle it comfortably? It's not very easy. So I think Cummins has handled himself extremely well. So has Langer. He's gone out with a fair bit of respect. And I think it's pretty clear from what Cummins has said that they need to have a calm person who doesn't have the sort of emotional volatility that Langer's had at times, that intensity that everyone talks about, despite the great passion of Justin Langer. So it looks to me, if he wants the job, that Andrew McDonald is a shoo-in. But whether he wants it longer term, other than the trip to Pakistan, remains to be seen. So change in the wind. But Pat Cummins, as has always been the case in Australian cricket, is the man in charge. It's the captain in charge, not the coach.
Andrew McDonald, then the assistant coach who's stepping up in the role for the time being. Charu, were you surprised by the outcome of all this, or more surprised by the process? Because Langer has, after all, just been at the helm for an Ashes and T20 win, although he'd already taken a little bit more of a backseat approach by then after players had raised that as an issue back in August.
Probably the process. Jim has mentioned, and yes, the world of sport, among other worlds, is pretty brutal when it comes to such appointments, or, of course, getting rid of such appointments. But I say, let's go back to one of my favorite words, communication, because we were talking about the Indian Cricket Board some time back, and the whole Kohli episode as captain, who really is, as far as Jim's concerned, should be the man in charge. But he, too, was treated in a very, should we say, a manner that the process seems to be a little opaque. So here, too, what happened to the good old-fashioned concept of communication? I mean, you talk to the man who's been leading Australia as their head coach for the last 4 years with obvious success. Surely he can't be saying, I've read in the media and some people are saying this, and, you know, what's going on here? I mean, I think the cricket board, the chief, the selectors, whoever need to sit with Langer and have a long conversation. So you've done 4 years, hope you enjoyed it. The team's done really well. And what makes sense, therefore, is to talk to him about whether you'd like to continue for another 1, 2, 4, what's your priority? Because we obviously are fond of you. You've done well. But whose opinion do you really take? Who are the selectors of the head coach? Is it the team? Is it the captain? Is it some other people? So this is a jumble that hasn't worked very well for Langer at all. He has to admit that it's their right to hire and fire. But to get somebody with obvious success for only a 6-month extension, that's rude. Because, I mean, what are you trying to prove? If there's somebody who's interning for the job, you can say, we'll give it to you for 6 months and then we'll see. You've done a really good job for 4 months and now we're going to see what you're going to do in the next 6 months. It doesn't work. Or are the players now clamoring for something different? It's all, nothing is adding up, and I do feel sorry for Langer.
I could absolutely see why he wouldn't take 6 months knowing that he wasn't wanted to continue. He's like sitting in a holding role to suit Cricket Australia to give them time to find somebody else. Well, let's bring in our guest, someone who will have a lot of insight on player coach, captain coach dynamics, even in what it takes to be a successful coach of an international team. The former Australian men's coach, John Buchanan, is with us. John, of course, had a lot of success with the national side, coaching Australia to 2 World Cups, multiple Ashes wins, and that run of 16 consecutive test match victories. John, welcome to Stumped. Great to have you on. Are you coached Justin Langer? You've been critical of Cricket Australia's treatments of him. What did you make of what Pat Cummins has had to say since?
Well, look, firstly, I suppose I'll underpin this one because I am a fan of Justin, obviously having been associated with him as a player and then as a friend and the person himself. I mean, I haven't seen his so-called coaching style, but I could understand that he is a person who demands excellence of himself and therefore of people around him. And if he or they don't live up to it, then he's going to come down hard on that. And I noticed in Pat Cummins' comments, you know, some of the words that he chose. One was he said that we've been very well schooled by Justin Langer. which to me gives a sense of, well, there was the headmaster and we were the pupils, and that was that was kind of the culture that operated. And as you said, we now want a calmer, more collaborative coach. Again, I'm not sure exactly what that will mean, because again, if we understand what coaching is about, and that's where I think there's a bit of a gap in the system that I don't think Cricket Australia, or you were just talking, Charu, about India, I don't think a lot of associations really understand the role of the coach. Yes, no doubt the captain runs the show on the field, but to get from field to field, from tournament to tournament, from year to year, and try to sustain success, that's not the captain's role. The captain's role is to captain a group of players and play himself and try to perform from game to game. But the overall planning, the strategy, the culture, the behaviours, all that sort of stuff really falls fairly and squarely on the coach. And so Langer, who came in 4 years ago, was given that task: change the culture, get the Australian team to be a bit more likeable and win some games. He's ticked those boxes. So at the moment, people are, I don't think really understand what that role is. And certainly then when you add to that other words like we're in transition and we're evolving, again, that is a bit of gobbledygook. It's a bit of smokescreen stuff for me. I mean, now that Langer, who was supposedly given the 6 months transition period, well, now that he's not there, well, what's transition? Who's running transition? What does that actually mean?
Remind us, well, I think you alluded to a little bit about what he was like as a player. What do you believe his coaching legacy will be?
Well, I think there's 4 years of turning a culture around for a start that was not great. However you want to look at it, it was in disarray. And you now have all the players coming out and saying we're a very, very united group. So that, to me, is one thing that's occurred in that 4 year period, if nothing else. The other thing is, I think they've all, to a person, to Nick Hockley, have said what a wonderful job he's done. He's just been the right person to come in and turn the ship around. So the professionalism, the excellence, the work ethics, all those sort of things will be always residual marks wherever Justin's been, whether it was as a player or now as a coach. So there is a fantastic foundation, I think, on which to build, which unfortunately Justin doesn't get to do, but whoever comes in next has a wonderful platform on which to launch their coaching career, I would have thought.
Hi, John. This is Charu Sharma from Bangalore. As somebody who wore this crown of thorns for 8 years, 1999 to 2007, I'd be very interested to find out your views on how the whole concept of being a head coach of a national team may have evolved over the years, let's say the last 20, 25 years or so. Has it really changed? What's the expectation now? What's the role? And who gets to select him? Is it all players now? I mean, are they the ones who really should have 80% of the choice here? What do you think?
Yes, well, I guess, if you listen to Ian Chappell and possibly Warney and a few others, there's one role for a coach, and that's something to do with driving. But the game has changed from Ian Chappell's days. And I listened to Nick Hockley when he's talking about transition and evolution, and it was very, very unclear what that meant. But one of the things that he threw into the mix was, well, we're going to look at shared leadership. We've got George Bailey in there, who's the chairman of selectors, and we see him as acting as a bit of an assistant coach. And then we've got possibly our assistants with somebody maybe looking after long form cricket and short form cricket. But we're not going to change structures, and we're going to keep the same sort of role as the head coach. So he was very unclear. But one of the things that is very clear to me is that if there are too many voices in the decision making, then it creates incredible difficulties in communication, because you and I, Charu, can talk to the same person with the same intention, and we'll use different words and they'll hear different outcomes. Or they've talked to you and I, but they don't like what you and I say, so they go to Jim and say, well, blah, 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 and see whether they can get a response from, just like our children, of course, which they are to some degree, that they can play people off. So the more voices that you put in this kind of leadership role and in this touring format as a group of individuals, I think it really makes it difficult.
Just to sort of wrap up, so there's also a vacancy with England, of course, at the moment, now that Chris Silverwood has gone. Knowing Justin Langer as you do, There's obviously been a lot of conjecture. Could you see him being interested in coaching England at all?
I could. I mean, obviously, he's just a passionate Australian, just wears the bag of green on his heart wherever he can. You know, I don't think it'd be the right time for him to do it, because I think he'll be just mentally and physically worn down at the moment, and he needs breathing space. He needs to get away from it, probably needs to do a couple of other things, and then reassess whether coaching is, you know, international cricket coaching is the career that he wants to still pursue, or maybe there are other things in life to do, because I just think there'll be a lot of opportunities for him, or because of the person that he is. But having said that, he's a good friend of Andy Strauss. I coached him in '98 at Middlesex, and he's just a really well known around that part of the region. Great friend in Nigel Ray, who's, you know, Saracens manager. Good friend of Gus Fraser. You know, so there are a lot of things that might be used to kind of tug him in that direction. But I think he'd certainly be a really good choice. There's no doubt about that. Whether he's ready to do it or not, don't know.
And let's face it, there are so many coaching opportunities, aren't there, with all the different competitions, the 100, for example, being one if in England. But just to pin you down before we let you go, who do you think Cricket Australia would be well versed to look at?
Well, I'll finish off on a controversial note. The New South Wales camp would like Trevor Bayliss. The Victorian camp would like Andrew McDonald. So it depends which power group wins. That's who will be catch.
John, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you and to hear your views. Thank you so much for joining us on Stumped.
Yeah, my pleasure, Alison, Charu and Jim. Good to see you.
That is it for this week's Stumped here on All India Radio. My thanks to Charu, Sharma, Jim Maxwell, and to you all for listening. You can keep in touch with us throughout the week on Twitter. We are at BBCWS Sport and use the hashtag BBC Stumped. Check us out on YouTube as well. Go to BBC World Service YouTube. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.